Tonight at 10, we're live in Edinburgh, where the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has taken everyone by surprise by announcing her resignation. After 8 years in charge, she said the time was right to step down, but it was nothing to do with any current controversies.
Being your First Minister has been the privilege of my life. Nothing, absolutely nothing I do in future will ever come anywhere close. Thank you from the very bottom of my heart.
The first woman to be First Minister of Scotland and a record period in office, Ms Sturgeon's decision will have implications for politics across the UK.
Well, let me first start by paying tribute to Nicola Sturgeon for her long-standing public service. I wish her well in the future.
Nicola Sturgeon's record as an impressive vote winner is undisputed, but her record in power has divided opinion in Scotland.
I really liked her as a person as well as a First Minister.
She's not done anything for Scotland, and they need somebody to take over, somebody fresh to take over.
Also on the programme tonight, police revealed that the missing woman Nicola Bully had alcohol-related issues connected to the menopause. The one-year-old who's received the most expensive medicine ever approved for the NHS, a £3 million life-saving gene therapy.
I can rub and scrub this house till it's shining just like a dime.
And the Holyrood film star and model Raquel Welch has died at the age of 82.
On BBC London, former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn condemns the current leader of a flagrant attack on democracy after being told he can't stand again as a Labour MP.
A very good evening from Edinburgh, from the home of the Scottish Parliament, which for the past 8 years has been dominated by the powerful figure of the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Her sudden announcement today that she is to step down, both as leader of the SNP and as First Minister, will change the political landscape here in Scotland and will no doubt have a wider impact on the politics of the United Kingdom. Ms Sturgeon insisted that her decision was not related to any current controversies and that she'd been considering her future for some time. She said that after a record period as First Minister, the job had taken its toll. Well, in recent months, Ms Sturgeon has seen her controversial gender reforms blocked by Westminster and her plans to hold an independence referendum blocked by the UK Supreme Court. Well, in tonight's programme, we'll be looking at the Sturgeon legacy and the reaction to her resignation, but we'll start with the announcement that very few had predicted. Here's our Scotland editor, James Cook.
No one has done the job longer. No other woman has done it at all.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along. Being First Minister of Scotland.
But Nicola Sturgeon says the job description of First Minister includes knowing when to call it a day.
In my head and in my heart, I know that time is now. That it is right for me, for my party and for the country. And so today I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party. Individual polls come and go, but I am firmly of the view that there is now majority support for independence in Scotland. But that support needs to be solidified and it needs to grow further if our independent Scotland is to have the best possible foundation. To achieve that, we must reach across the divide in Scottish politics.
The divide is cultural as well as constitutional. The case of the double rapist Isla Bryson posing particular problems for the First Minister and highlighting concerns about her attempts to make it easier to legally change gender. There are also splits in the SNP about Ms Sturgeon's desire to turn the next general election into a referendum on independence in all but name.
By making my decision clear now, I free the SNP to choose the path it believes to be the right one, without worrying about the perceived implications for my leadership, and in the knowledge that a new leader will steer us, I believe, successfully on that path.
First Minister, I think it's fair to say that the NHS is in a really serious situation.
the attainment gap between rich and poor pupils, which you'd said was one of your core missions as First Minister, remains pretty wide. And despite what you're saying today, polls suggest that you've got nowhere near creating a sustained majority for independence. Do you have regrets about one or any of those issues?
Oh, again, James, I'm a human being. I don't know if you've got regrets about things in your life. Of course, I've got regrets about all sorts of things in my life. And as I reflect on my time as First Minister, there'll be things I am hugely proud of and things that I regret. And if I had my time again, I might do differently. And forgive me, there'll be plenty of time for me to do that. There'll, I'm sure, be plenty of time for you to do that. And I'm sure you will.
Nicola Sturgeon is not leaving office here at Bute House because she faces imminent electoral defeat. Far from it. Her party is still way ahead in the polls, and although she divides opinion, there is a lot of support for her. No, it seems she is going out of a combination of frustration and fatigue.
And through the toughest...
And while she's been here, there have been 5 UK Prime Ministers. Rishi Sunak, the one to land in that awkward position of praising his opponent.
Well, let me first start by paying tribute to Nicola Sturgeon for her long-standing public service, and I wish her well in the future. Now, obviously, Nicola and I didn't agree on everything, but in the short time that we did work together, I was pleased that we were able to announce 2 free ports in Scotland.
Paying his tribute, Scottish Labour's leader recalled tussles of old.
I first met Nicola Sturgeon when I was 12 years old because she was standing in an election against my father. And there's been lots of disagreements, lots of arguments, lots of back and forth. But one thing you can't doubt is this is someone that is an able politician, someone who has been, as I say, in politics for 20 years. And that level of service is, of course, worthy of respect and thanks.
Alex Salmond is now a political opponent too, mentor turned tormentor.
I'm not certain that this is going to be a bad thing at all. I mean, there's talent within the SNP. I think the key litmus test is going to be whether the next leader sees the opportunity to redefine the strategy for independence, to broaden the base of the independence campaign, and starts articulating the fundamental case for Scottish self-determination.
So, Nicola Sturgeon's sudden departure creates a moment of uncertainty for the SNP, for Scotland, and also for the future of the UK itself.
And James is with me now to talk a little more about the events of the day. Why now? Did the decision take everyone by surprise, as people are saying?
I think that's a very good question, Hugh. I mean, it did come, relatively speaking, out of the blue. It's something of a shock, but it's not a complete surprise because the pressure had been mounting on Nicola Sturgeon. There was no immediate existential threat that was going to push her out of office, but she was under a lot of pressure from a whole variety of corners for a whole variety of issues. We heard about some of them there in terms of the National Health Service, in terms of education, in terms of, most of all this year, gender. So there are a lot of issues for her there. And then there's also the question about whether she was running out of road towards independence, particularly in trying to advance this idea of turning this next general election into a de facto referendum, as it's called, on independence. That had caused considerable disquiet within the party. And I think what we heard from her there, saying that actually this frees up the party to perhaps, she didn't quite say it, but perhaps to amend that decision without affecting her or being concerned about her leadership, I think had something to do with it. I also think it would be a mistake to understate the effect COVID had on her psychologically. She talks about it a lot, and I think it opened her eyes to the possibility of a world outside politics where some things may even matter more.
Well, James, we'll talk a little more later about maybe the legacy and some of those who might be wanting to succeed. But for now, thanks very much. James Cook there, our Scotland editor. Well, as James was saying, the challenges facing the incoming First Minister, whoever that is, are considerable. The Scottish Government is responsible for major areas of domestic policy, including health and education. And of course, the state of the NHS in Scotland, we've reported on it, is a cause of deep concern to many, as it is across the UK in many parts. Public sector workers, of course, also wanting more pay. That position is challenging as well, as it is in England. Now, Nicola Sturgeon's supporters point to her undisputed record of success in 5 elections to Holyrood and to Westminster. They say that can't be disputed. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon has been to Greenock to talk to people about their response to the resignation.
Greenock in Inverclyde. On its quiet high street, the news and noise surrounding Nicola Sturgeon's resignation has been filtering through.
I'm sad, I nearly cried.
Really?
Yes.
Big deal then, Nicola Sturgeon going for you?
Yes, it is. Yep, but you've got to move on.
Popular among some, others glad she is going.
I just think it's time that she resigned anyway. She needed to resign.
Why?
So I don't know, I just don't, she's not done anything for Scotland.
Scotland voted against independence in 2014. This area, though, was almost evenly divided amongst those voting yes and no. Those divisions still evident amongst diners in this local cafe. Celebrating or commiserating?
We'll be commiserating. I think she's a sad loss to politics. I don't think anybody can touch her as far as politician is concerned. She's sharp as a tack.
I'm ex-NHS, and I think since the SNP came in, and particularly Nicola, health services slid down the hill in Scotland.
So what do you make of her resigning?
I actually quite agree with her going. I think she's come to the end of her road.
Parts of Greenock have high levels of deprivation. The work Nicola Sturgeon's government has done to tackle this appreciated by many here, although some do have doubts about more recent decisions she has made.
Free bus passes for over 60. The school kids that all get bus passes, so that helps them get to school in the dark mornings.
Do you feel like she's had areas where she's been less sure-footed?
Well, with the transgender, yeah, I didn't agree with that.
Well, you're in the most socially deprived area in Scotland. So I suppose the SNP policies that she's driven and kind of led have helped this area.
Like
you
what?
know, the child payments, the baby boxes, you know, anything that's kind of helped kind of promote and improve child poverty is helping this area. So yeah, I think she's been a big advocate for that.
For years, Nicola Sturgeon has been the most recognisable figure in Scottish politics. As she steps down from leading, though not from politics altogether, the race to the top to succeed her will now get underway. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Greenock.
Well, there's no question, of course, Nicola Sturgeon has been all-powerful in the world of Scottish politics for over 8 years. But her political journey started during her teenage years as a believer in independence for Scotland and as a committed member of the Scottish National Party. In her statement today, she did acknowledge, as we've heard, that dealing with the COVID pandemic had been the most challenging period that she'd known. Some of her own party colleagues have been highly critical of her approach to the question of another referendum on independence. BBC Scotland's Martin Geisler looks now at Nicola Sturgeon's legacy.
It's a journey which began on the doorsteps of Ayrshire and took her to the highest office in the land. When a teenage Nicola Sturgeon was delivering their leaflets in the 80s, the SNP were a fringe party. Neither she nor they could have imagined what lay ahead.
Nicola Sturgeon!
The first years of her leadership must have felt like a dream. Shy by nature, she was filling arenas and strutting the stage like a rock star. Scottish politics had never seen the likes.
It is now a significant force in British politics, not only in Scottish politics, and indeed, if the next UK election produces a hung parliament, the SNP's presence at Westminster might yet prove to be a crucial form of leverage for securing another referendum.
But the good times didn't last long. Alex Salmond, Sturgeon's mentor, was cleared of a series of sex charges in court. The case caused a rift between the pair that would never heal. There were struggles on policy too, on health, education and on the economy. It's argued Scotland's worse off now than when she took over. And recent controversial policies on gender reform, most particularly, prompted claims she'd either lost touch with or stopped caring about the public mood.
There's all of that, all those problems and more, and yet half of Scotland, give or take, is still four square behind Nicola Sturgeon and her vision of an independent future. The problem is that needle's not shifting, not really, and the polls suggest she will struggle to get her lifelong ambition across the line.
Give it every ounce of energy.
So she's decided it's somebody else's battle now, but she promised today she'll stay in the fight, right behind them.
I firmly believe that my successor, whoever he or she may be, will lead Scotland to independence, and I'll be there cheering him or her on every single step of the way.
Even Nicola Sturgeon's enemies admire her strengths. A tireless worker and a great communicator, she still has approval ratings any leader, anywhere, would envy.
I probably had more disagreements with Nicola Sturgeon, or certainly more public ones than anybody else. I still disagree with Nicola Sturgeon on everything, but it doesn't mean that I haven't, got enough appreciation of the effort level that's been put in to say that I wish her well in what happens next.
And so the show's over. Scotland's leading lady, rock star to some, villain to others, is leaving the stage and her own indelible mark on the country. Martin Geisler, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, let's have a word then with our political editor, Chris Mason. We've talked a little bit about the impact here in Scotland, which clearly is significant, Chris. But there's a much wider impact too, isn't there?
There really is, because Nicola Sturgeon's a huge figure clearly in Scottish politics, but the SNP on her watch have become a big political player around the UK. Just look at her longevity. She has been First Minister for longer than either the Prime Minister or the Labour leader Keir Starmer have even been MPs. So a towering figure on the political stage here and around the UK. But a figure who, despite winning election after election after election, was repeatedly denied the very thing that drives her in politics, that desire for independence, that desire for a referendum. Now, those in the SNP say that that is unjust, but nonetheless it's a political reality. That, alongside all of the other political problems that were stacking up for her, perhaps meant a harsh decision taken by her in private, concluding that the time was best to go now before potentially things get trickier for the SNP. What's really striking tonight, Hugh, speaking to her political opponents, Conservatives and Labour figures privately, is that they say they are relieved. And expressing that relief, they are paying her the ultimate political compliment, because they are acknowledging that she was a formidable opponent to face. Those who believe in the union of nations of the UK, who oppose Scottish independence, are delighted. They think their cause has been advanced as a result. For Scotland now, a period of soul-searching, particularly for members of the SNP, with that awesome responsibility of picking a new First Minister from a very open field. Very few people have a strong view or certainty about which way things will turn out, and Scotland soon to be under new political leadership.
Chris, many thanks once again. Chris Mason there, our political editor here at Holyrood. We'll be back here in Edinburgh just before the end of the programme to look at some of those potential other successors to Nicola Sturgeon. But in the meantime, Sophie, let's join you.
Hugh, thank you. Police have revealed today that Nicola Bully, the woman who disappeared while walking her dog in Lancashire last month, had some significant issues with alcohol brought on by struggles with the menopause. Detectives say it meant she'd been considered a high-risk missing person from the start of the investigation. Our correspondent Danny Savage reports.
When Nicola Bully's partner reported her disappearance, information given immediately classed her as a high-risk missing person. Police say this was due to specific vulnerabilities, namely an issue with alcohol brought on by ongoing struggles with the menopause. In a statement they added, as a result of those issues, a response car staffed by both police and health professionals attended a report of concern for welfare at Nicola's home address on January the 10th. No one was arrested in relation to the incident, but it is still being investigated.
I've asked you to respect the family who are going through unimaginable pain and distress at this moment, but those vulnerabilities based our decision making in terms of grading Nicola as high risk.
Detectives say it's unusual to go into such detail about someone's private life, but they want to avoid speculation.
This is the bench where Nicola Bully's mobile phone was found. Police today said her dog was discovered between the bench and the gate. The dog's harness was found between the bench and the water. A police expert also told us today that at the time she disappeared, there was enough flow in the water to have carried her down over a nearby weir and on towards the sea.
Nothing has contradicted their theory that Nicola Bully fell in the river.
There is no evidence whatsoever or information to suggest any third-party involvement or Nicola leaving that field.
The search goes on to help a family get answers. Danny Savage, BBC News, Lancashire.
The former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has called Sir Keir Starmer's decision to bar him from standing at the next general election a flagrant attack on democracy. Mr Corbyn, who currently sits as an independent, was suspended as a Labour MP in 2020 in a row over anti-Semitism. Sir Keir said Labour is now unrecognisable from 2019 and told members, if you don't like that, the door is open and you can leave. The death toll from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria has now reached more than 41,000. But nearly 10 days after the devastating quakes there are still people being rescued alive from under the rubble. Today, a 74-year-old woman was pulled from the ruins of her home near the epicentre in the city of Marash. She had been buried under the rubble for 226 hours before she was found. A one-year-old girl who has a rare inherited condition that severely damages the brain and nervous system has become the first child to be treated by the NHS using a new life-saving gene therapy. The treatment costs almost £3 million and is the most expensive medicine ever approved for the NHS. The little girl was diagnosed after her 3-year-old sister was found to have the same life-limiting condition called MLD. She, however, cannot be treated. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh has been following the family since the start of Teddy's treatment last summer.
Teddy and Nala have MLD, metachromatic leukodystrophy. Children are born apparently healthy, but the condition gradually attacks the brain and body.
You a ladybird?
This was Nala when she was 2. Now, a year later, she can't walk or talk and is tube-fed.
Her body is basically kind of gradually shutting down. She will lose her eyesight, she will lose most of her senses, and so it will basically come to a point where there's nothing left for her to lose.
Nala's MLD had progressed too far for her to be treated. But it meant the condition was picked up in her sister Teddy before damage was done. She's at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital having stem cells removed from her blood, the first stage of a groundbreaking gene therapy.
So when they told us that there was treatment available for Teddy, it was kind of like a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, because Nala can't be helped. So, you know, we're extremely grateful in one sense and then really sad on the other sense though.
2 months later, Teddy's personalised therapy called Libmeldy is ready. Scientists have added a working copy of the faulty gene which causes MLD to Teddy's cells.
Wow.
Cells? The magic cells?
They're your cells.
Libmeldy costs more than £2.8 million, though the NHS has agreed a confidential discount. This one-off infusion aims to stop Teddy's disease in its tracks. Teddy will need to spend several more weeks in hospital while her gene-altered cells make their way to her bone marrow and start to produce the crucial missing enzyme that causes her condition. Fewer than 10 children a year in the UK are likely to be eligible for Libmeldy, one reason why the price tag is so high. Teddy's doctors are trialling similar treatments for other rare conditions.
I think it will be transformative in genetic diseases. Libmeldy shows that we can take their own stem cells, put in the gene that their illness is deficient or faulty in, and correct the condition.
Teddy can expect a healthy future.
Nala Charlie Shaw.
But Nala is terminally ill. Her parents want MLD screened for at birth, so it's always picked up early enough for treatment. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
And you can watch Bittersweet Medicine, Fergus's exclusive programme looking at the patients, families and clinicians using the UK's most expensive medicine. It's on BBC iPlayer now. You just search for Bittersweet Medicine. Football and Manchester City have beaten Arsenal 3-1 to leapfrog them and go top of the Premier League, though Arsenal still have a game in hand. After City took the lead, Arsenal equalised with a penalty from Bukayo Saka before goals from Jack Grealish and top scorer Erling Haaland ensured victory, putting pressure on Arsenal's title hopes. The American film star and model Raquel Welch, who became an international sex symbol in the 1960s, has died. She was 82. As David Sillitoe reports, she was often credited with breaking the mould for modern-day action heroines in Hollywood films.
Raquel Welch did not expect anyone to remember what she thought was just a silly dinosaur movie. But 1 million years BC, with its giant malevolent turtles, poor grasp of evolution, and prehistoric bikinis turned Raquel Welch into a star of teenage bedrooms across the world. In one fell swoop, everything about the real me was, she said, swept away.
Makes me feel so young.
It was pretty clear how she was being marketed.
Coffee?
In Bedazzled, she was given the role of Lillian Lust.
Black and sweet.
In Public, she played the role.
Mountain is spoons full.
But she said she had little control over her career.
Now listen here, boy. I used to be a square, but now
She was born Jo Raquel Tejada, the daughter of a Bolivian engineer, and her heart really lay in song and dance. Light-hearted, old-school glamour.
You know, a lot of people want to be great artists. I don't know that I'm capable of being that, but I hope I entertain a few people, you know.
The producer behind many of her projects was the man she married in 1967, film producer Patrick Curtis. It will be fair to say she was better known than many of her films.
Never again will I let you go into such terrible danger.
But she did win a Golden Globe for The Three Musketeers.
So too, what would you?
I can rub and scrub this house till it's shining just like a dime.
And on stage and television, she did get a chance to show off her song and dance skills.
You got the shake and I got the shimmy.
Raquel Welch had set out wanting to be Ginger Rogers and ended up being defined by a doe-skin bikini.
The Hollywood star Raquel Welch, who has died at the age of 82. Time now for a look at the weather. Thomas Schaffenacker is here. Hello.
Sophie, thank you. Good evening to you. The weather in the last few days has been very settled. High pressure has been in charge, but that is changing now. A lot of cloud heading our way, but it's staying mild. Today we got to 16 degrees. Tomorrow, despite the cloud and the rain, it'll still probably be around the mid-teens across southern parts of the UK. The good news is that the rainy, drizzly start will probably give way to something drier come the afternoon. But there's a lot of cloud in the Atlantic, and actually many weather systems out in the Atlantic heading in our direction. And it could actually turn quite stormy across northern Britain towards the end of the week. So here's the forecast for the morning. You can see the outbreaks of rain across England and Wales, the cloud extending into the lowlands, but north of that, in northern Scotland, it's actually clear and chilly tonight, so a touch of frost is possible. So a lot of cloud, hill fog first thing tomorrow morning, drizzle, then probably fading, and maybe some sunshine developing, or at least a few sunny spells across central parts of England. 14, maybe 15 degrees, but I think for most of us it'll be closer to around 11 or 12. So yes, overall quite mild. Here's the nasty low pressure that will be whistling across the north of the UK during the course of Friday morning and into the afternoon. So a spell of severe gales are likely. Still somewhat uncertain where the worst of the winds will be, but probably whistling through northern parts of Scotland, gusts possibly in excess of 70 miles an hour, very windy in the lowlands, but also at the moment, if you check the weather apps, for example, in Newcastle, it's suggesting gusts of up to about 70, 75 miles an hour. So very, very blustery. That will cause problems across northern Britain. In the south, it'll be breezy, but we're not expecting the gales. And look at that, again, mild, around 14 degrees in London, 13 expected in the Midlands, a little bit cooler in the north. The weekend's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. There will be some rain around. I don't think it's going to be particularly heavy, but the chances are also a bit of sunshine will come out. And again, on the mild side, the average this time of the year is closer to 8. We're into double figures. And now it's back to Hugh in Edinburgh.
Thomas, thank you very much. Well, here in Edinburgh, as soon as Nicola Sturgeon announced her departure, the names of potential successors were already circulating. No one has yet declared an intention to run formally. Nicola Sturgeon certainly refused to name a favoured successor today, but there are several potential candidates. Kate Forbes, for example, the Scottish Finance Secretary. She's just 32. She's enjoyed a meteoric rise through the ranks. She's currently away from Holyrood on maternity leave. And then Angus Robertson, well, for 10 years, he was the Westminster leader of the SNP. He's now a member of Nicola Sturgeon's cabinet, so he's very experienced. John Swinney, a former party leader and now Deputy First Minister. He is certainly, in terms of the leadership here, the most senior member and, of course, a very close colleague of Nicola Sturgeon's. And Humza Yousaf, who's 37, the Health Secretary and a prominent member of the newer generation of SNP leaders. Let's have a final word then with our Scotland editor, James Cook, who joins us once again. Whoever succeeds, James, it's clear they'll have a very tough act to follow.
Well, they will, because Nicola Sturgeon, Hugh, will be remembered as one of the most successful, most impressive political leaders of her generation in terms of what she delivered at the ballot box, a string of landslide election victories for the SNP. And if you take a step back and think where she came from to get there, she's talked to me before about the 1980s, growing up in Ayrshire in the 80s. And it could have been pretty lonely in those days to campaign for Scottish independence when Labour was dominant in Scottish politics. To go from there all the way to a Scottish Parliament and then to run the government here for 8 years is no small achievement, to say the least. But she's always been in politics for one thing above all, and ultimately she's not delivered it. She has not delivered Scottish independence, which leaves her successor with big challenges. First of all, immediately actually, on the issue of gender, what to do about Westminster blocking the bill that was passed here to try to make it easier to legally change gender. That's contentious. Should they take up that fight again? And then secondly, on the wider issue of independence itself, what do they do? Where do they go? Is a de facto referendum in the general election, is that a good idea or not? These are big challenges, difficult challenges, and it may be that we'll find out in the days, weeks, months and years to come whether this was a high watermark for independence or a waypoint on the route there.
Whatever, it's a big day, and it's a very significant event today. James, thanks very much. James Cook there, our Scotland editor, and that's all from all of us here in the 10 o'clock team in Edinburgh on the day that Scotland's longest serving First Minister announced her intention to resign. Now on BBC One we'll be joining our colleagues in the nations and regions with the news where you are, but from all of us here at the Scottish Parliament with the news that the First Minister is handing in her resignation after 8 years in power, I'll wish you a good night.